And welcome everybody. We're glad to have you here. We have just a minute. It looks like we've still got people settling in, and then we'll get started.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Brewer. I direct our education program as part of the Teen Core, the Training, Education, and Mentorship Core at Accords. And I want to welcome all of you today to our seminar. For those of you who may not be as familiar, a little bit about what is Accords. We are supported by the University of Colorado School of Medicine and Children's Hospital Colorado, and we are something of a unique one-stop shop environment for faculty to conduct pragmatic research, receive various types of services and supports for grants and projects, along with incredible mentorship, training, and education in health services research. So Accords conducts pragmatic research in real-world settings to improve healthcare and outcomes. We provide all kinds of supports that you see there in front of you. And I particularly want to highlight our economic analysis core, our pragmatic trials core, and our learning health systems core, who have been partnering really closely with our education program on this series. A couple of upcoming events we want to make sure on everybody's radar. In February, so just in a couple of weeks, the next in this series, we will be exploring the case of value in learning health systems with a panel. We have Katie Trinkley, Mark Greitz, and Liza Creel. In March, we will have the next in that series. We have Sunil Kripalani joining us from Vanderbilt, and he will be here on campus in person. So if you are interested in having an opportunity to meet him, we encourage you to come join us for that one. And in April, we will hear from Dr. Jean Kuttner on next steps for learning health systems in Colorado. In May, we will also hear from Matt Lascauzo as part of our Emerging Topics in Digital Health and Clinical Informatics series. And then the Colorado Pragmatic Research and Health Conference is June 4th and 5th. We hope that's already on your calendar. If you haven't yet, today is the deadline for abstracts for the CopperCon conference. You have until midnight to hit go. And we hope to see you there also in person here on campus. Okay. Before I introduce our speaker, just a couple of housekeeping items for those of you who are joining us online. Please use the chat throughout the seminar. Dr. Kawamoto has also said that he welcomes interruptions. If you have urgent questions throughout his talk, raise your hand. We'll try to capture those as we go through. And we will also have some time for Q&A at the end of the hour. And then lastly, please complete our evaluation as we get toward the end of today's seminar. We really take your input seriously, and we hope to hear from you how we can best structure our seminars and workshops to meet your needs. Okay. Today's seminar is part of our Transforming and Advancing a Learning Health System, Multiple Perspectives for Mutual Gain series. It's the second in our series, and today we welcome Dr. Ken Kawamoto. Dr. Kensaku Kawamoto is professor and vice chair of clinical informatics in the Department of Bioinformatics at the University of Utah. He's also associate chief medical information officer and director of the Reimagine EHR initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative to improve patient care, the provider experience through interoperable EHR apps that convert data to actionable insights. For his work on Reimagine EHR, Dr. Kawamoto was recognized by Modern Healthcare in 2019 as a top 25 innovator. Dr. Kawamoto is also co-senior director at the University of Utah Digital Health Initiative and co-chair of the Clinical Decision Support Work Group of the Health Level 7 International Standards Development Organization. So we are thrilled and honored to welcome Dr. Kawamoto today as he presents Enabling a Learning Health System, the University of Utah Experience. Welcome, Dr. Kawamoto.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And real pleasure to be here. I've had a lot of interaction with the Colorado folks who are really quite advanced in this area. And and leading the way. So it's a great pleasure to be with this group. Um, as was noted, I prefer to be interrupted. I can kind of switch what I'm talking about, and it's kind of a nice size for discussion. So if any, even if it's not urgent, if it's just like you want to make a comment, whatnot, please put it in chat or just speak up, and I'll just make adjustments. All right, so let me share here. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just gonna start on here, but please stop me if anything's unclear, etc. Okay, so just disclosure-wise, I have honorary consulting, sponsored research, licensing, or co-development with a variety of organizations, and some of the EHR apps I describe are or may be commercialized. In terms of what I'd like to talk about today with you, just start with some personal and topic background. I think it's always useful to kind of see where folks are coming from, and then spend the bulk of the time just describing some of the learning health system capabilities we've worked on at the Università, and then hopefully leave plenty of time for discussing some challenges, enablers, and discussing your experience. So let me go ahead and start with some personal and topic background. I always find it interesting to see sort of where people came to, and especially health informatics is, I guess these days kind of mainstream, but is still a pretty small field. So kind of describing where folks came from. Myself, I was a Southern California native, went to Harvard for undergrad. Um, met my wife, Caitlin, when we were doing undergraduate research in North Carolina. I was at the NIH there. She was at the UNC for that summer. And it's crazy to think I was 18, so as old as my son is now. But that has some relevance here because as we were finishing college, etc., we were looking for a place together, and as it turns out, the lab she really wanted to join was at UNC Chapel Hill, and uh, I was initially not really wanting to go. I had gotten into Harvard Med School and was wanting to go there, but it was like, okay, well, obviously, I'm going to choose where my spouse wants to go, fiance at that time. So went to Duke, and it ended up being really kind of a life-changing decision because I don't know how familiar folks are with the MD PhD program at Duke, which I did, but um, I think more do it these days. But back then it was pretty rare. You do your equivalent of third-year med school, the clinical rotations, your second year. And for MD PhD student, that makes a lot of difference because basically you do clinical rotations before you do your PhD. And of course, I was kind of a basic science person, but realized I really thought the health information technology in the wards was just crazy bad. So even though I'd never taken computer science before, actually purposely avoided it because it was rumored to be hard to get an A in computer science back in college. I was like, oh, this is what I hope to do. And it turned out Duke was one of the relatively few places at that time that actually had a training program in informatics. That's where I also ran into Ed Hammond. I don't know if folks who know him, but he's kind of one of the founders of our field. I was just at Duke celebrating his 90th birthday celebration at Duke, where it's amazing. He's 90 and still a center director, active. And the president of the university came to give remarks, etc. And as it turns out, he's one of the founders of HL7, which is the interoperability standards development in health IT. So he encouraged me to get engaged, and a lot of my work and what I'm going to describe is in that realm, and it's all just happenstance because I happened to be there. And then when I was at Duke, did my MD PhD, was on the faculty right after grad school, finished up med school after that, and then I had for my career development award from NIH, my external mentor was Joyce Mitchell, chair of informatics at Utah at the time. So as it turns out, after I was on faculty at Duke for a few years and looking for something that combined research with operations, she recruited me to the University of Todd. So I've been here since 2011. Love it here. It's a nice mix, probably similar in Colorado, where there's it's kind of the Western spirit of innovation, and let's just get things done, and have been here since in a mix of operations and research roles. But that's sort of where I am and sort of how I got interested in this field and decided to dive into it. So that's a little bit about me. In terms of background on learning health system, as noted in your website, it's really about continuous self-learning and adaptation based on learning about how we're doing and improving. So I think kind of just describing active work is useful in describing and sharing ideas. So I'm going to just start by uh, one of describing one of the learning health system capabilities we've been working really heavily on, which is Reimagine EHR, which is enabling our learning health system capabilities by going beyond what we can do directly in the EHR with what the vendor provides us. So this is an initiative I started back in 2016 with a variety of stakeholders. Our goal is to improve patient care and the provider experience through interoperating apps that can stand on top of these EHRs and convert data to actionable insight. We've implemented over 15 solutions, over 60 million in grants, which we're very thankful for. It's one of the pillars of the digital health initiative I uh, co-direct. And we have a paper where we really laid out everything we learned and what it took to stand this up in this paper here that hopefully could be useful. In terms of what this kind of looks like from an IT tech kind of perspective, you have patients, you have providers, you have different devices that they use and different ways that you want to visualize and make use of this data. Historically, it was the case that different electronic health record systems had different ways of doing these kinds of integrations. But it's really been in recent years that there have been standards and federal regulations that require EHR vendors to allow these kind of third-party integrations. And a lot of what we do is to take advantage of these approaches so that we can build a technology platform that can be used to extend what the EHR can do. So the vision here is that as a doctor, it's actually a joy to use the EHR where you actually, look forward to using the system. It's saving you time, easy to do the right thing. And when you imagine how the EHR should work, it soon becomes how it does work rather than a source of frustration. I'm just going to show you a few examples of what we worked on in this area, just to give you a sense. So, for example, this is one of our earliest apps. This is our neonatal bilirubin management application with the goal being to prevent brain damage in newborns. What you can see is the Epic shell that I blurred out. But everything inside is our own web application. So this is an application that amalgamates patient data, visualizes, includes things in some of these tabs like predictive analytics of what's going to happen. It's been quite successful. We have a paper in JAMA Open where we showed that we significantly improved the clinical care provided, reduced clinician time required by a factor of 3, and providers gave it a usability rating and standardized instruments of best imaginable, which is the highest rating. We made iterative enhancements where this was the winner of one of the inaugural showcase for this kind of app at our HL7 AMIA annual meeting. Um, and this is also currently being disseminated for free across a number of other hospitals as well. Uh, oh, and this is quite widely used in our own, moderate-sized hospital. It's consulted, I think, over 60,000 times a year by our users. Here's another example. This is a little bit getting into the AI space. So this is for diabetes pharmacotherapy shared decision making. This was done in collaboration with Hitachi and working with Hitachi and Reagan Street, Indiana University, Titus Schleier. We developed AI-driven prescription guidance on what's likely to happen with different pharmacotherapy and other interventions for patients with diabetes. And you can see here that this panel is showing what's likely to happen for the patient who's currently on metformin with weight loss versus a sulfonylurea versus a GLP-1. And you can see sort of the predictions and also cost information that's obviously a relevant concern. Here's another one. This is where we're using prediction model-driven lung cancer screening shared decision making. This is funded by ARC. The issue here is low-dose CT screening could save more lives than breast cancer screening, about 10,000 a year, but oftentimes pretty low rates. A big part of it is because CMS requires you to do shared decision making using this kind of decision aid. And what we do here is we have a 23 variable National Cancer Institute predictive model, and we incorporate this right into the clinical workflow, automatically calculating all this and pulling all the data. We found that this significantly improved screening rates in our primary care clinics, and this is a free app, and we're integrating this with multiple institutions, and I think Colorado went live with this sometime recently. Here's another one based on this. This is going through the patient portal called My Lung Health. This is providing this kind of information, but through the patient through the patient portal as part of pre-visit questionnaires and using things like videos to get patients educated and engaged. And we're starting to get towards the end of a multi-site randomized control trial and hoping it shows some good results. Here's another example. This is MD-Calc. If you're a provider, good chance you've heard of this tool, use it. It's a pretty widely used clinical calculation tool. This includes many prediction rules, including those that leverage machine learning. We work with MD-Calc to make it an EHR integrated app that autofills inputs, auto-generates documentation, et cetera. And we found that it improves accuracy and can be enhanced with this thing called CDS hooks, which is shown here. This is using, again, an exogenous HL7 standard. So this is an approach where you can take things like BPAs in Epic and build all the logic, including pretty sophisticated logic outside of Epic in a shareable way. And what this one did was it identified when particular apps like this, in this case MD-Calc, should be used. And we found that this significantly improves appropriate use of these kinds of tools. I think this is my last example in this kind of area. So this is Disease Manager. This is an app that targets chronic diseases, which we all know is a significant source of morbidity and mortality. We're building a variety of disease modules here. And what this does is when you have a patient, it auto identifies what diseases the patient has, retrieves the relevant patient clinical guidelines, synthesizes data from across the EHR, and provides guidance around it. Lots of time-saving features we've implemented, including these buttons towards the right, where if you click on it, it just adds your orders to the ordering cart in Epic. And what we found is in controlled settings, it has significant improvements in recommended care, 81% versus 48%. And it's starting to get picked up use in our health system. And we continuously work on this as a platform for really trying to address a lot of diseases at the same time. And this was the winner of our 2021 HL7 Anemia Fire App Showcase. And this is just showing we can include, this is for diabetes. It just shows where we're incorporating machine learning predictions in here too. It's a little bit hidden, but it's there. So I'll pause there. Before I go on to the next topic, I'm actually doing great on time. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to interrupt or comments and let me know. Otherwise, I'll keep showing some examples. Okay, so I'm going to next talk about our clinical distance support committee. Just as an example of a responsive type of health IT governance we've tried to implement at the University of Utah. This is published in the AMI annual proceedings as a pragmatic guide. So the problem addressed that is pretty universal is we have a lot of clinical distance support fatigue. This is where there's just a systematic lack of response to things like alerts and reminders, BPAs, that kind of thing. And it's just because we're desensitized, things lack relevancy, lack accuracy, mismatches with workflow. And this is really a vicious cycle, right? Because when you have new CDS you've developed, even if it's like really good, right? It just leads to more fatigue and everyone just kind of ignores it. It's a challenge that no matter how good what you produced is, if all the rest is noise, people have a natural tendency to ignore. So this is a major problem, especially as we try to optimize care and enable a learning health system. So this was identified as a major issue back in late 2014, particularly with regard to pop-up alerts. There were lots of competing priorities like meaningful use, ICD-10, and then we needed a solution that was compatible with existing resources, which included I see two FTEs here. It's probably more like one FTE of the total personnel available for developing, managing these kinds of things, which is pretty typical. And in the literature at the time, almost all the things that were available were only available uh, basically used very high resource environments. There's a question here about slides going to be made available. I think so. Um, and it uh, can you confirm that it will be shared? I'm happy with this being shared.
Yes, a
Yes,
recording
wonderful,
and all the slides will be shared after on the Accord's website.
wonderful. Great. Thank you. And then how can Julianne had a question. How can a hospital health system access these tools you've just introduced? Is it a software app to purchase? So what is the approximate cost? I'm wondering about the barriers associated with systems benefiting from great work you all have done. Thanks. So depends on the tool. A lot of these tools are free. Free in the sense that we don't charge for any license, etc. There oftentimes is a bit of a cost, right, for you to implement, for us to help you implement. Um, some of them we just eat the cost and help. So bilirubin app's a good example where we're just like, well, like we don't want to stand in the way of like babies getting better care. We'll just eat the cost of helping folks integrate. Other ones like the lung cancer screening, the government helped give us money to disseminate. One of the things that we learned from that is it's just a lot easier if we can disseminate things through a cloud-based model instead of. So, for example, some of these apps, what we do is we provide it in a Docker container and you host it in your own site and you connect, etc. What we learned is it's going to be a lot more scalable if we can do it through a cloud hosting. So we've been working towards the model of putting our apps onto the Amazon Web Services that's for protected health information. That's externally facing as well in the University of Utah, getting all the institutional approvals so that we can try to start sharing some of these in that manner. As you might imagine, it's a little bit hard because health systems generally aren't in the business of providing IT services to other health systems, especially when it's being done for free. So I get questions from like our legal counsel, like, wait, so you want us to help provide care for other institutions and you want us to do it for free and take on liability? So it is a bit of a challenge, but we're working through it. If there's specific ones you're interested in, please let me know. The only one among those that is explicitly commercial, from what I mentioned, was the MD Calc one, and they have a great team that provides that as a commercial solution. Okay, thank you for those great questions. So on the CDS governance, we created this enterprise CDS committee. This is the core of our CDS governance, includes clinical quality IT leaders, oversees our CDS strategy and execution with a specific focus on reducing CDS fatigue. And our scope includes meta alerts, BPAs, health maintenance, and really focused on clinicians. So core principles, these are kind of the key things we live by. So first one is, and probably the most important one is we add new CDS only if it's actually desired by intended recipients. So this is part of our governance process. If you can't tell us that like we've talked to people who are going to receive this and or their leaders representatives and they want it, we just aren't going to put it in because right. Well, I'd say the only exception is what, for example, if it comes from a chief medical officer to say, Ken, you need to do this, it's a little bit hard to say no, sir. We refuse to do it. So but in general, it has to be approved by the people who are actually going to receive. And we use the most appropriate, least disruptive workflow integration approach. And, just make sure the benefits are achieved, outweigh the costs, doing things like running in silent mode, approving pilot use, etc. Um, so typical life cycle for a new request, we get the request. For BPAs, we require a structured request form to be used. We require an engaged clinical champion. And we have a working group that meets every week to do a preliminary assessment, suggest alternatives if appropriate. And then we reviewed it in our CDS committee, where the requester is asked to attend if it's potentially controversial. And then if it's approved, we prioritize for build. And I'd say I'm very proud of this committee we've created. We just had one again, this week, and a lot of people tell me it's one of their favorite meetings, is if there's such a thing, because it's so efficiently run and gets to the point, gets the thing, everything needed. So, for example, this week, I think we wrapped up in 25 minutes and just said, okay, we're not going to waste your time. Please go back to your clinical duties. Um, so for reviewing existing content, we do active solicitation of feedback, we do basic analytics, and then for problematic ones, we improve it, we transition to more appropriate areas, or we just get rid of it. Um, we do have judicious use of experimental trials. We do for the sometimes when there's significant clinical uncertainty, we've been fortunate that the IRB in our institution has explicitly exempted us for having to get IRB approval to say run a randomized control trial. If the reason is we're doing a quality improvement to see like should we include this, should we turn this off? So an example here is we ran a clinic randomized control trial for turning off BPA reminders we had for cancer screenings and fall risk screening because it was duplicative with other content in our health maintenance. And, there was the question like, why do we have this? Isn't this just noise? We already have it in other places. So we ran a clinic randomized trial, removed it from half the clinics. We didn't really find a difference. So we just said, okay, well, and we just turned it off. So this is the kind of thing we can do. Yes, Tyler.
Yeah, hey, thanks. This is great, and I'm taking the liberty with you said to interrupt you, so I'm
Yeah.
I'm doing it. Question on, and maybe you're going to get to this, but whether it's learnings from, say, for example, a randomized trial, or from even to the level of your dig governance, where someone asks
Mhm.
for a BPA and your team comes up with, well, there are better ways to do that other than interrupting people. I'm
Mhm.
curious, sort of, in that model of a learning health system, how you sort of keep track of, or how you've sort of learned over time of, this type of solution or this type of
Yeah.
problem is most amenable to a, you know,
Yeah.
non-interruptive alert, or whether alert interruptive
Yeah.
alert. I'm sort of curious if you can talk about like that learning as opposed to, or is it just expert opinion?
I think a lot of it's just been institutional knowledge, just that, uh, and um, uh, and so we, and other parts, just so that the governance doesn't get in the way, we tend once we have a pattern that makes sense, we generally approve it without having to require additional governance review. So that's one way where we kind of uh, try to have best practices where if there's something that we consider best practice and the committee agrees this is something that is the way we want to handle these things, we'll just actually put it into, our discussion in minutes and decide that something like this will always be approved and you don't need to come back to us. We just did another one of these this last this Monday where it was like, what, we did this is the second one we received and like doesn't make sense that like we would need to review this. This is a best practice pattern. Anything like this auto approved in the future, no need for any further review kind of thing. So that's how we try to handle that. But it's a great point. I also see some other comments.
Yeah, we've got one from Katie about
Yeah.
cross-institution IT support as not the norm and culture, but a
Mm,
great example here of that happening. And then the approval and governance processes are important, but often we find that the cadence of the meetings can bottleneck or slow down progress.
mm.
Is that something you face at Utah? And maybe how have you gotten around it if so?
Yeah, for the cadence, we have our big governance meeting monthly. It's always amazing to see all the physicians show up because it's like, wow, like that's a compliment when you have high physician turnout, right? But usually not a problem. For things that are really time sensitive, we will do e-votes or we will create a little task force and send out an email and say like, hey, anybody disagree with these two people on the committee figuring out? So good examples are like, things like the IV fluid shortages, the antibiotic, bottle shortages, culture shortages, and those kinds of things. Like we can't wait like 3 weeks until we have a meeting. So those we just handle and, basically use email, e-voting if we need, that kind of thing to just move things forward. And we also have us already as a committee approve things like if it's safety, compliance, those kind of things, and it can't wait. We already have a pre-approved process that it will be pre-approved by the committee, and we just ask to be notified when the next committee meeting comes up. So we try to have the governance set up so that when those kinds of things happen that are time sensitive, the governance doesn't get in the way.
Right.
And
And
then,
then
yes.
Jason asked, can you speak to where or how research proposals interact with the governance system?
Yeah, so I think the place where research is helpful is if it comes with funding, can cover the funding part. Um, Generally, the ideal approach, of course, is for folks in IT to be approached before a research proposal comes in, and then we can review it beforehand just to have a curbside. And usually it's like, oh, that looks reasonable. Like, yeah, uh, go ahead and please support, put it in. That's usually helped by the fact that for grants, A letter of support from IT is generally considered required for it to pass muster in the grant review. So that usually causes the interaction. We occasionally have had cases where people have gotten like a PCORI grant and it had never been reviewed with IT. And then like in the IT governance and the clinical decision support governance, the providers look at it and be like, we don't want that. That doesn't make any sense to do a pop-up alert there. That's been a challenge. But what we basically try to do is spread the word, like, we're friendly. Please talk to us before you submit a proposal, just to avoid putting in something that we don't really think should be implemented. But um, I I think what's helped is the responsiveness of the governance, and we have particularly Travis Gregory, who oversees our Epic system, who's extremely responsive. Um, so that helps because you know that if it's time sensitive, you can talk to him, right? You can talk to me, whatnot, um, and get response soon. People are more willing, I think, to connect. I think people just generally don't like to connect when they think it's going to be an 8 week turnaround and like the grant's due in 6 weeks, that kind of thing.
Really helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm just gonna show some more examples. So this was from that paper, just showing as an example, the clinician-facing BPAs per visit went down quite a bit. The existing ones were the red ones. You can see went down quite a bit. The green ones, we actually added quite a bit during this time frame. We actually added close to 200 new BPAs in terms of the BPAs themselves, but the actual volume was pretty low because we purposely were keeping them low. Here's an example, data for clinician-facing pop-up BPAs, that went down about 50%. And also including med alerts and BPs went down about 50%. We did find that for example, for med alerts, we found that what we wanted, which is discontinuation of the triggering drug within an hour, went up a fair amount as well. And when we looked at BPAs with what we considered effective interactions, so people doing what we wanted them to do, it doubled in effectiveness as well. So summary here was just that programmatic CDS governance can be implemented for commercial EHRs with existing resources, like typical resources. And we were able to reduce CDS burden. I think the biggest thing probably here is we really set an expectation that we will not turn something on unless you actually get a yes from the people for whom it's going to turn on, just because, otherwise they're just going to ignore it anyway and get mad. Okay, I'm going to next chat on VDO, which is our enterprise platform for understanding and improving care value. So, as you know, a foundational problem for a learning health system is measuring value, which includes the finance component. So, this was a New York Times kind of editorial. A fundamental and largely unrecognized problem is we don't know what it costs to deliver healthcare to individual patients, much less how those costs compare to the outcomes achieved. And understanding costs could be the single most powerful lever to transform the value of healthcare. So this is something we worked on. Here's two papers that are kind of the core references for these. The first is a JAMA paper led by Dr. Vivian Lee, who was our Senior Vice President for Health Sciences, now at Harvard, implementing this VDO Value-Driven Outcomes Program. And another one is a paper in JAMIA that talks about the technical infrastructure to how we did this. So this is a long time ago video. So this has an interesting story. It was kicked off in May 2012 by Dr. Lee at University of Health. It was I think it was like a Wednesday morning. Like I got an email at like 8 a.m. from Dr. Lee along with other folks saying, "Hey, my meeting's got I had a meeting canceled this afternoon. I think it was like 2 p.m. Can we meet to talk about this thing?" And of course, everyone showed up. And the gist of the meeting was, hey, like, I just had a meeting where I can't actually explain the value we provide, right? And, the benefit we provide for the cost. And that's a problem, right? That we can't actually get that information. So I want you guys to come up with a way where we can tell. So the objective there was to establish an analytical foundation for understanding and improving care value, which is really cost relative outcomes. And it was resourced and managed as a top institutional priority. And the kicker was they expected a prototype in 3 months and an operational system in 6 months. Um, So what we ended up doing was we decided to do in-house development. We looked at off-the-shelf products, but they were insufficiently flexible. Obviously, used a pretty agile development approach with focus on rapid implementation. We wanted to be modular and extensible, cost effectiveness, and that we only wanted to implement things if it was going to change decision making, and we wanted to obviously minimize the need for manual collection of additional data because people hate to do that. So this was the team that worked on it from a variety of different groups. They actually rented out a little wing in one of the new buildings on our campus, and like just put us there and said, you know what, whatever you have going on, you need to spend at least 3 days a week working on this. Put everything else down and work on it, which essentially meant that we were there weekends, like evenings, that kind of thing, working on it. Um, it was interesting conversation to say, oh, you can't come in this Sunday. Sorry, I have this thing for my kids. But it was an interesting time, and what we produced was pretty cool. So this is a overview of what we had. So we have clinical data sources, financial data sources, summarize those into data marts. I'll describe these cost allocation methods to allocate those costs to encounter level costs. And then had quality and outcome roles to create encounter patient level quality and outcomes, and created reports and dashboards to use that along with the actual data. And I'll just briefly talk about some of these cost allocation methods. So the central questions here it were first, what are the general ledger costs that are attributed to direct patient care? So general ledger is where like we put all the costs right in the institution. Uh, uh, you know uh, wh- Everything that are in the cost. And in a place, right, that's an academic medical center, this is challenging because, say, a school of medicine has cost due to overlapping missions. There's clinical mission, research mission, education mission, and you know, a lot of these costs don't actually relate to direct patient care. So that was one important question. Another important question was how do we allocate these costs to which encounters and how much? So these are some of the central questions we worked on in this project. And some examples. So, for example, we do some cost allocation by actual cost. So we take the actual cost and apply it based on actual use. So, for example, in our supply management system, we can see exactly how much we paid for a specific surgical implant device, and we assign it to a given encounter because that device was used on that patient. And this is used for about a third of the costs that are allocated in the system, most supplies, meds, and labs. There's also time-based cost allocation, and this is a proxy for resource utilization. So, for example, in the medical intensive care unit, we could say, okay, these are all the costs we have in running the floor. It could be labor, office supplies, equipment. And then we can look at the total number of hours that are spent in a given month in that unit, and how much it cost with all these costs. And then we can get a per hour cost, and then we can say, oh, this particular patient spent 27.8 hours, so we're going to allocate 27.8 hours worth of cost. And this is used for places like hospital ED or facility utilization radiology, about a third of direct facility costs. So those are some examples. And I'm going to just describe like some reports and dashboards. We use these also in actual source data level, but there's nice reports and dashboards we can use. So for example, here, this is one dashboard for opportunity identification. So we can use this notion of a coefficient of variation, standard deviation divided by the mean, grouped by things like different surgical procedures, et cetera. This just gives you a sense of like where are the opportunities where care standardization could reduce costs, identifiable by things like procedures, diagnoses, MSDRGs at a given a site of service and date range. This is another visualization of the same information where we can plot, for example, the relative size of the variation opportunities. To really look at, is this an area? We can look at details as well. You can look at things like average cost per case. So this is the average cost per visit for providers. So we can say, hey, for this kind of procedure, this kind of hospitalization, what is the variation in providers of how much it costs for the same kinds of cases? And of course, you need to risk adjust, et cetera. But this can start a conversation, right? To say like, hey, like, why are there so many differences? And you can click on all these. These are all drillable. So you can go down to you can drill down to the level of like, this is the individual implant or suture that was used by this provider. And sometimes you see like, oh my gosh, there's significant difference in these supply costs. This allows us to look at cost versus complexity. So you can look at, is the cost really just due to the fact that it's more complex? Um, you can look at things like, hey, individual encounter costs, and get a sense of like where are anomalies, are these expected? Um, and we can do things like cost trending to see, hey, how have things changed over time? And does it make sense? Um, but this has been really useful, and it's been quite foundational in our learning health system efforts, top down and bottom up at our institution. Just as some examples, our ortho folks worked on total joint replacement improvement using this framework, and they were able to reduce the mean direct cost by 11% while improving the composite quality indicate index by from 54 to 80%. Our hospice worked on reducing laboratory testing costs, where they were able to reduce the mean cost per day by a fair amount without changing length of stay. And our folks also worked on sepsis care, where we were able to have a 23% reduction in total direct costs without a change in mortality. And I think this last one is really kind of small, so I think I'm making good time. Just going to touch on this new NIH Genomics-enabled learning health system network because it's obviously about learning health systems. So NIH recently awarded NCI and NHGRI some money to establish a network of genomics-enabled learning health systems. So the goal of this network is to identify advanced approaches for integrating genomic information into existing LHSs. The approach is to coordinate implementation of scalable genomic medicine interventions across the network. The members are Vanderbilt, Geisinger, Harvard, Duke, VA, Indiana, Northwestern, and University of Utah. I'm the contact PI of this, along with MPIs Mark Yandel and Marty Testrani. And we're still on the early phases, but it's been interesting. And one of the things I really kind of learned is in a lot of institutions, it's focused on primarily the research folks on the ability to learn and get data and move fast. It definitely has been faster with us. It's been interesting how we are able to act a lot quicker than a lot of our colleagues because of some of the structural benefits we have, which I'll briefly talk about. So I'm just gonna, I think I'm almost done with actual prepared material. So I'm just gonna summarize some of the key challenge and enablers of our learning health system and try to open up for some discussion. So with all this kind of experience, I'm sure you've experienced a bunch of these things, but as I was preparing this material, I just kind of took a step back and thought, what are the key challenges of trying to have a learning health system that we've learned? I think a big one is structural, which is the disconnect between research and operations. I felt this a lot because I specifically got recruited in for an operations role while still having a research role, and um, it is quite interesting, right? There's really distinct cultures, approaches, priorities, personnel. I always find it interesting when you have meetings with one group of folks or complaining about the other group, and you meet with the other group and they're complaining about the other group. It's a pretty common issue. So I found that's been interesting. Challenges with data access is a huge one, including cost data. So, for research, due to HIPAA guardrails, you're only supposed to access data that you should have access to. I found this is huge. This fact that for research, oftentimes it's hard to get access to the data is a big challenge because obviously researchers can be very helpful for a learning health system, but it's a challenge when you have to put in a IRB application, wait 6 weeks, bother the IRB, why is it taking so long? Wait another 2 weeks. It's a challenge. Um, there's also a lack of a systematic process for learning improvement usually, and it's just because we're busy, it's expensive. So that's a challenge. Along these lines of cost, key enabling infrastructure can be costly and require institutional investment. I think especially in these kind of environments where um, it's really tight financially and everyone's looking for places to cut, this is a challenge, but I think the bottom line is if you want to do this kind of thing, you have to invest. And but that's a challenge, right? Because money is tight. And of course, current healthcare payment models generally don't provide sufficient incentive to enable a learning health system at scale. This is good. This can be there for certain payment arrangements. Inpatient care is oftentimes pretty amenable to this because we get paid a lump sum as an MSDRG, but that's generally a challenge. And then, we discussed this a little bit earlier in the chat and whatnot, but we're generally reinventing the wheel across systems, right? Like even the, we're like a mid-sized system. I think we do about 3 billion in business clinical care every year, but that's still like pennies, right? In the big scheme of healthcare, and we're just reinventing stuff all the time everywhere. And that's a challenge because it means that we're ineffective, effectively failing to really learn from each other and learn together. So some enablers, recommendations. I do think fostering collaboration across research and operations is really important. I do think investing in dual role personnel who can act as a bridge is really important. Um, I think where I've seen this succeed, that's those folks have been really, really helpful. And then they can also help with address data access issues because the folks in operations, if it's for QI, can pull it as well and have access. Implementing systematic processes for learning and improvement, I think, is also important just because like this kind of stuff doesn't happen just on its own. And then leveraging existing strengths and investing in infrastructure. For example, at Colorado, I've learned there's this transfusion order set that was done by Dr. Anstead and the Quartz Learning Health System that had over $1 million in savings. That's huge. And for example, the CoLab PED suicide screen work with Doctors Gatto and Kennedy. I think that's like another example, right, of how this can be done. And at least in my realm, University of Colorado and the folks at your location are pretty well known as folks who do this kind of work, informatics, advanced informatics, learning health system stuff. So I think there's something you can really build off, right? Because you already have a strong baseline and foundation to work from. Um, in terms of aligning with financial incentives, that's pretty important, whether it's grant indirects and patient cost reduction and pay for value. I do think one thing that's oftentimes not looked at, but I think is important, is preparing for a future that requires a learning health system and rapid care optimization. It's always challenging because it's not in the here and now, but I think we will need these capabilities when we have to practice systematically, or else we will go bankrupt. So, from that perspective, from a financial sense, I think it makes sense to invest in these kind of things. And of course, we want to avoid reinventing the wheel and collaborating, whether it's using interoperable informatics solutions, having these kinds of discussions, whatnot. So just as a summary, as we strive to improve patient care as a learning health system, I've described a few university doc experiences that hopefully could be useful to think about. And then there are, of course, key enablers. I think the research operations synergy is a huge one. Investment is needed, always challenging, but needed. And then aligning with financial incentives and collaborating. Just a partial list of acknowledgements of the folks whose work I mentioned here. And then this was just a starting point for discussion, but I really would love to learn your thoughts and have a participate in a discussion about how we can enable learning health systems.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kawamoto. It's really inspiring to see the successes that you've had in your system. I am curious if anybody else has questions right now. We had a few in the chat as we went through, but anyone have lingering questions you really want to make sure we can chat about? One of the things as you brought up challenges, I posed to the group, what challenges are you having? Are they the same? And Dr. Trinkley raised that one of the challenges is figuring out how to speak the same language across different kinds of roles. So researchers have words for things that don't make sense, or just kind of talk past operations folks or some of our other partners required to do this work. So I'm curious if you have thoughts about how to kind of align that vocabulary and speak the same language when we're thinking about this kind of learning health system work.
Yeah, I think structurally the most helpful is just having folks that can spend time in both.
Okay.
Um, and it is I I mean, in the end, it just comes down to people. So I think people who both can kind of have a foot in both doors and can help guide other folks. So I'll oftentimes have conversations with my colleagues when it's like, okay, when it comes to IT governance, in this context, never mention that it has anything to do with research, because you will get deprioritized, right? Like cast it as a departmental quality improvement initiative, and in some cases where say it is for research, and just knowing how sort of different folks think and how to cast things so it makes sense from those views, just like you say, I think it's really important. I think I don't know if there's any real way to like do it didactically. I think a lot of it's just like having experience in both.
Yeah. Having people experience that and try to communicate what they're working on. Yeah. Jason, I see your hand up. You want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks for sharing. I think I just wanted to follow up. I know you had mentioned the IRB piece earlier and getting most of this under QI, but I also, you're prolific in publishing. If you could talk about sort of that interaction between QI and the research part. I know you talked about data. I think just for context, IRB is pretty reasonable with, not reasonable, they're great actually with anything that's like information only. I think they start becoming uncomfortable when any of the CDSs recommending certain actions, and it becomes sort of a little bit harder lift. And so we do stuff under QI as well as IRB, but maybe if you could share a little bit more about how you um, uh, get into that gray area and are
Yes.
successful.
I think our RBs and reasonableness have a really important role. So for example, like I remember one of the things I loved coming here from Duke was Duke's IRB process was so much more onerous, where it's like I don't really want to do research anymore because it's like such a pain, right? So I think having a reasonable IRB and folks you can discuss with makes a lot of sense. Um, I think. There are, if you look up the NIH regulations on what constitutes a quality improvement, that's helpful. For example, our IRB director, although she moved in, I think now she's directing compliance at Stanford. Um, she was great in that we had these meetings, discussions, and said, okay, if you can craft an email to us saying these are the things we're trying to do for QI that falls under this NIH, guidance of what is not creating generalizable knowledge. Regardless of whether we publish manuscripts or not, that's not really the criteria. It's whether your intent is to create generalizable knowledge or it's your intent is to improve quality at a local level. Um, and they have examples on that NIH website of what they consider to be quality improvement. Then she was able to reply back and say, okay, like I agree, this is quality improvement. You're good to go. So I think having those kinds of discussions with the IRB leadership, I think is really important. Um, and I just kind of think of it as like, oftentimes what we're doing in this kind of work is trying to promote standard of care. And it seems crazy if you have approaches where like you can't promote standard of care. Um, but it is a real consideration. I think it is really helpful just from QI perspectives. If it's for QI, we can pull data, under HIPAA, right? Because it's needed for quality improvement. Um, and if you have people who are in dual roles doing QI and research, and if you can confirm the reason why I'm pulling this data is for QI, like that's first of all fast, right? Because you can be like, okay, like can we just confirm with the division chief here that like outside of research you just want to know this for QI? And it's like, okay, I got the clearance. I can just pull the data and we can do an analysis. And even if you're doing for research, oftentimes there's a big queue for how long it takes to ask, just because the need for data always exceeds the resource available for the data pulls. It's just like inevitable, I think. Um, just having the ability that once you have the RB, being able to pull the data yourself is also huge. So I think that's another super strong benefit of having dual role people.
On a related question from Dr. Trinkley, if you submit your trials as QI to your IRB, are you still submitting to clinicaltrials.gov? Something that
Yeah.
we've been on the fence about here.
We do clinicaltrials.gov usually only if it's a randomized control trial and we want to publish on the randomized control trial. We we so if it's for QI, we generally don't do it unless it's an RCT, simply from the fact that if it's an RCT, they're gonna ask you when you try to publish.
Yeah.
So I try to advise folks who are doing this for operations and doing RCTs, like if you think there's at all a possibility you might publish on it, go ahead and put in a clinicaltrials.gov record because like it's better to have done it than to later be like, well, we didn't do it and we won't even consider your trial.
Yeah. Are you registering other studies or projects in that QI space under other things like Open Science Framework or other registration platforms?
We do not, but that's primarily just because I try to avoid doing work I don't need to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really helpful just to kind of close the loop on that. So we do have RCTs that go under determination of QI, and we have been registering under clinicaltrials.gov. And it sounds like that's aligned with what you guys are doing.
I think so, and that's primarily because like you don't want to be like, let's say you do QI and you find you reduce mortality by 35%. Like you don't want to be like, oh, well, these top level journals won't even consider us because we didn't register it.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Anyone else have questions for Dr. Kawamoto? While you're collecting thoughts, I'll point to our chat and our evaluation link. Jordan put it in a couple minutes ago, and we, again, hope to have your feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you for the time. And I know I hate it when these kinds of things always go to the top of the hour because you can't bio break. So I think I'll drop
Yes.
off. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.